So last time we were talking about, in part one, the size of different things and, of course, Beheaded Hill and such. And this section, we will be going over just very minimal about of size, but we will be covering things about statements and how we ought to take them, as well as AP versus DC are the two main topics covered in this video. So I will be bringing up the points that both sides make and contrasting them with the evidence to support what is most consistent and accurate. So hope you guys enjoy.
I just have a couple last things to show for power, and then we could move right into potency right there.
Sure.
What was that?
I said sure, yeah.
Yeah, okay. There was, of course, Kaguya and her expansive truth-seeking orb that was literally gonna wipe out her time-space dimension and create a new one.
Oh.
And I think, I know you probably might have expected I would bring that up. And then, let's see. It should be somewhere around here. Then we have a later scene. We know there's a planet in her dimensions, and we could also see there's moons and a sun. So there's plenty of people who highball Kaguya to solar system level, which I'm not going to do, but I'm just saying if we want to go, there's nothing really that says that it couldn't be, and we know that she's going to destroy time-space dimensions that do have planets, suns, and moons in them. So unless you want to bring a direct counter argument to that, like I'm not going to specifically argue that, because one, I don't believe she's that powerful or Naruto's that powerful, and I don't think I need to, but I think you're highballing the Beheaded Hill a lot, so if we want to go with highballs, I could theoretically go this direction.
Oh no, I actually am looking at the actual sizes of things and going off of how they're portrayed consistently and going from there. Now we can disagree on whatever's more likely, but what this is purely you're taking a Black Zetsu statement about something that never happened and applying it as truth. It's a statement.
Well, I believe the guidebook statement also says it was going to happen, but
I mean, okay. But,
that's why I'm not going to argue that. I'm just saying,
I mean,
technically by statements,
Sensui could destroy the Ningen Kai by 50% of his power just powering up. By statements, basic boxer, normal, Hajime, no Ippo, can punch at the speed of light. I mean, by statements, shoot, I know I could find it somewhere. You know what? Here, by statements, this normal kid, at the beginning of Yu Yu Hakusho, he's a bully and he's a million times more powerful than this other normal kid. And there's nothing that contradicts it. He beats him up.
And you have to be able to decipher between hyperbole
correct.
statements, which I don't think Black Zetsu's was supposed to be. But like I said, I think obviously going solar system level is way too far.
Well, what would you? I'm sure. Again, this isn't APDC, but we could nip this easily. I think. I agree that you need to decipher what's hyperbole or not. How's the best way to do that? Because I know I use feats and scaling to determine what is or isn't hyperbole. What do you use?
Yeah, I would agree. Feats to scaling, and I would say like author's intent, guidebook statements that back it up.
Oh, I mean, I feel I could easily back up with... Let me say I disagree with author's intent. I believe in death of the author as the superior means of... I think author's intent is great for storytelling and like foreshadowing and character development. All of that's awesome, but I don't think that actually plays a role in power scaling. Whenever we do calcs, we're calcing what what the feat shows, not what the author intended it to be. I don't think power scaling inherently as a thing has to actually do with intent. I mean, that I would just go back to Sensui can destroy Ningen Kai with 50%. It heavily has author's intent.
And extend, but then it's like if you calc a feat one way and the author's intent is another, and that means it might consistently like have feats that contradict that later, but then that goes back to using the most consistent feats, which I think is the best way to go.
Yeah, there's nothing that contradicts Sensui being able to destroy Ningen Kai with 50% of his power. They even leave Human World to fight.
I mean,
there's nothing.
You also have Kurama saying that, or the statements from Kurama being able to turn the world to ash.
There's statements that put Yusuke at over omnipotent. But the statement game.
You could go the same route with Naruto and Hagoromo or whatnot.
So we agree. So we agree that.
Yeah.
That's why I laughed about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's also the Kinshiki stating he split worlds.
Split the world. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't take Black Zetsu's statement that has 0 supporting feats or scaling that puts it anywhere. Otherwise, I feel I could argue a bunch of things using the same author's intent or a bunch of other... Yeah. Okay. So, on APDC. Alright, so, yeah, I probably don't need to... really need to put any scans up or anything. This was a section covering statements. And how you pretty much can't take statements without feats to suggest something is necessarily true. You need at least feats or scaling. At least that's how I consider it. If you want to take... Now, here's an interesting thing, is that I have people who watch me who don't agree. They would say that, a feat is consistent as long as there are no contradictions, or you have author's intent suggesting that it's true, different lore and everything that would go with it. I disagree. Here's why, though this is separate, because this is in the debate. Both sides ended up agreeing. The Kaguya thing is pointless. It's as pointless as Yusuke is infinitely above omnipotent. The whole point of showing that was that neither of us actually think those things are true. Hopefully. But to address this part real quick, what I think happens is I believe I have people who watch me who believe in author's intent and see the lore, see it makes sense that since we can in fact destroy Ningenkai or flatten it, the world's surface with 50% of his power, just his aura alone, or various other things where there's lore and context behind it. Context is important. That is true, and they will take those statements as true as long as it's supported by this context or author's intent, if you will. The problem I have with it is that I believe that model being used there, those determining factors for is something true or not, is a bad model. That doesn't mean that I think you can't be justified in your beliefs. I believe that the model that is being used there to justify truth is one that people who aren't as bright as others can easily use that exact same logic and that exact same model to come to wildly different truths, because the model is bad. What I believe happens most of the time is there are intelligent people who honestly try to read into things accurately. And what happens is it's not that you're necessarily looking at the author's intent. You're looking at your interpretation of the author's intent. Again, not that I believe that author's intent supersedes death of the author, as I explained in the video. But what's important to note here is that there are smart, intelligent people who can take author's intent and can generally put 2 and 2 together. But every qualifying factor behind why you take it as true, such as it's not contradicted and such, can be applied equally so by people who don't care about being accurate and use that same model for truth to arrive to things that are vastly untrue. So it goes against, it's too messy, in my opinion, for me to use when I harp so much on being as accurate and consistent as possible. I want supporting feats or scaling, which generally scaling, you have a base feat that you scale from, etc., to suggest the validity of it. That's where I come from on that. I understand that there's people who want to take statements as true so long as X, 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 and Y, Z reasons. But I believe whenever you take those X, Y, Z reasons without any feats or scaling to suggest its truthfulness, you open up a pathway for terrible terrible conclusions from people who don't try to be as accurate or can't put two and two together as intelligently. But that's pretty much finishes that part up. In terms of statements, yeah, Kaguya claiming anything with their TSB or ETSB is a moot point. There was no feat or scaling to suggest anything at the level that people try to claim her to be at. And if you take it as true, you got to take Sensui's and Yusuke's and all these other statements as true. As they equally so don't have those statements. Or they don't have the feats or scaling to suggest the statements are true. Which is why I never argue for it. I only brought up the Yusuke statement and stuff in against like the Kaguya statement. I was never going to bring it up on my own as an argument for Yusuke because that's a bad argument. Anyways, alright, continue. Okay, so AP versus DC. Can I find it? Of course not. I actually did a little AP versus DC thing on Paint. That's what I'm trying to pull up. Alright, upload. Okay. And let me get the other one real quick. There we go. This one right here. And I can explain it too, but I think this might be the easiest with my perfect drawing skills. Okay, so here's basically why I think probably the biggest crux and difference between Yu Hakusho and Naruto is that there's a difference between destroying something and destroying it with the air pressure. And then there's probably even a bigger difference when you're talking about the size, like the AoE, of the attack versus the destruction that is caused. So let's just do just these two pictures. The first one, you have an attack that is the size of 100 meters cubed with a total force of 10,000. And little guy here, he has a durability equal to 10,000 meters, or 10,000 per meter cubed. If he gets hit with 10,000, energy, he'll die. However, little guy is very little, and he is the size of a single meter cubed. Would you say that if the attack hits him, he dies?
No.
I agree. My second...
I know, I understand all this, but yeah, you could keep going for the audience's sake.
Alright, well, second... No, never mind. I've explained it on my channel far too often.
Okay. Yeah, because, for example, but there's one thing I bring up, is when Frieza gets blown up in Namek, the planet blows up, but while he's unconscious, but technically he wouldn't actually need planetary potency durability because it goes off in all directions, and if in the anime, you literally see rocks and trees floating around. It's do those trees have planetary durability? Obviously they shouldn't have survived in the first place, and the manga only shows rocks, but yeah, I understand the point.
Yeah, so my main thing is, whenever you look at all of your Naruto feats that you showed that were super flashy and super awesome, they're also destroying a lot of matter. But because they always seemingly require, unlike Sensui's feat, who did it with the AoE of a fist, require big ol' AoE. Destroying more is awesome, that's impressive. Destroying more with less is multiplicatively, based on the amount of AoE less, also more impressive. If you were to have the same total force in picture 2, shrunk down, instead of 100 meters cubed, down to 1 meter cubed, all those 50s would become a totality of 10,000 in 1 meter cubed, therefore able to actually kill the little guy. The smaller things are, the more potent it is. Naruto attacks, he has attacks that are potent, way more than just what they can destroy, Rasen Shuriken and such, but nothing even close to what even Sensui can do.
Okay, and I guess it's my turn to try to disprove that. So the first thing I'd like to bring up is, okay, here is Turtle Island, which, if you want to highball and use maps that show it, it could be considered good island size, and it also has ecosystems and whatnot on it, and mini mountains on its back. And Guy was able to Guy was able to dwarf that with his Hiradora, which is just a physical attack, no chalk or anything. That wind is all from his physical strike. And in the scan above I posted, the edges of it were able to crush rock, so it has potency as well, that air pressure.
Can you put the second one you did again? It's not loading for me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, this is another one, but this is from the manga showing Hiradora in front comparing to the Turtle Island in the back. And here is the other one that shows the edge of it destroying the large rock pikes at the edge of the turtle, showing that it has immense potency, and that's just the wind pressure from his strike, which Kasame took point blank at the epicenter of the attack and survived. And Kasame is like Sage Mode Naruto tier, or honestly below.
He took the air pressure.
Yeah, that whole thing is the air pressure of his one attack.
Yeah.
And, okay, so that could already arguably, that's at least basically, I would say, at least city level up to island level, depending how big you think the turtle is or how impressive you think that is, but somewhere between that area. And then you have, of course, the famous Madara feat, where you're talking about using air pressure to hit things.
Yep.
Madara not only uses the air pressure, but it's miles away, and it straight up still, it slices those mountains in half. Not even breaks them, it slices them in half. That's how potent that attack still is from miles away. And those are arguably pretty damn big mountains, considering you could say there's smaller ones right in front of it. But let's just say they're about mountain size. But hitting, like slicing through them from that distance with a casual strike already puts like Madara's potency with that swing at least like island level, if not country level. And then we could go even further.
Wait, that swing puts him to island level to country level?
I would say island level, but you could highball at the country level, but...
Because I will apply anything and everything here to Sensui, of course.
I mean, I would argue that's more impressive because Sensui's attack, he was standing on the hill itself when he shattered it. This, like, those are the meteors Madara hit that are right next to his sword, and they completely shattered and disintegrated, basically, and then the mountain still gets sliced after it goes through those. And then we have this next scan, which is mountains are getting cut off all over around him, and these are large mountains, and you can see in the bottom left there's like tiny little mountains over it off into the side. Here's some here, I'm showing on my pointer, but there's some small mountains and then these larger mountains around, and they're getting completely sliced and diced. And then let's see, here is second.
Just to fill the silence, I think you're actually bringing out what I consider of the most impressive feats in Naruto right now.
Okay, yeah. And then, okay, here is Hashirama's Buddha, which dwarfs the mountains around it, and Kurama in front of him. And then his attack, which completely makes the mountains look like little bumps around it. And Madara and Kurama basically tank that attack. They take some damage on the perfect Susanoo, Ren, and Kurama, but they're basically unharmed for the most part. And, okay, here is Hashirama creates multiple giant structures, Rashomon gates, that are each larger than the mountains around them by multiple times, it looks like. And Kurama's beast bomb that shot out completely rammed through them, and basically all they could do was change its trajectory. And let's see if I can find the other scan. I think I got it. Okay, maybe I don't have that one, but we have the Ten Tails, which was able, after it went through those, it went across an entire lake and smashed through them and went across the horizon basically. And the Ten Tails could basically flick Eight Tails Beast Bomb right back at him casually, and this was the first form Ten Tails. So basically something that could smash through giant larger than mountain-sized, powerful gates, and can only have its directory changed by that, is like it's superseded by a little flick by the Ten Tails in its first form. And the Ten Tails, hold on. I think this is it right here. Yeah, okay. The Ten Tails, there's other scans of it too, but the Ten Tails was strapped down physically by Hashirama's gates.
Yep.
And after Obito absorbed the Ten Tails, he was able to like break right out of them casually. So Obito's physical strength after absorbing the Ten Tails, or at least his power, it would be more potent than the Ten Tails. I'm gonna try to find a scan of Obito breaking out. Okay, here's him getting locked down by Hashirama's thing. His pillars. And he uses a bunch of them all on one spot, which, like as you would say, would increase the potency of these the restricting power, because it's all on Obito's small body rather than spread across the Ten Tails' large body. And he just casually breaks through it. And then the Ten Tails was also trapped in that barrier I showed above. You want me to post it again, or do you know what I'm talking about?
Post it again.
Okay, this barrier right here.
Yeah.
In there.
Some of these don't load, but I know what you're talking about, but some of them don't load on my screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and then it shoots a beast bomb within it, and it gets trapped and shoots up the top of it because the barrier is so powerful. It withstood that ten-tailed beast bomb, which I showed before, which is massive and powerful. It withstood that, and you can see in the scan too of how the blast above dwarfs the mountains below. And then we have Obito, who is basically able to rip right through those. I'll post a scan. He casually rips this barrier apart with chakra arms. Hold on, that's the second scan. But right here, he uses chakra arms just to grab that and rips it apart like paper, like something that just stopped a country-level blast within it. So his arms are far more potent than the AoE of the ten-tailed beast bomb. And then you have Naruto, who is able to contend with Obito with just his BSM form, his Bija mode, Sage mode form. And then he got even more powerful with his Six Paths mode, like incomparably more powerful. And so basically, this version of Obito's potency is nothing compared to him. Let's see. I have a couple more things I'd like to bring up in regards to potency. Okay, here is Sasuke cutting out these giant meteors, which basically covered a small country, but as we can see, they dwarf the mountains around them, and they're way larger than Sasuke Susanoo, and each slash cuts like right through them. And I showed how large the fragments were before, and how just the fragments dwarfed mountain ranges. So the potency for that would need to be pretty crazy to go through them like that. And then Naruto was able to clash with Sasuke's perfect Susanoo with just one tail of Kurama, was able to stop one of Sasuke's perfect Susanoo slashes. And then we have Madara. Basically, Madara took this attack, Rasen Shuriken attack from Naruto, which just the shockwave cut the God Tree in half, which was like many mountains thick. And Madara was not cut in half by this. And then Sasuke cut through Madara like butter. So that would require incredible potency.
Yep, I agree.
And you have Momoshiki after absorbing the fruit, not even fully transformed yet, and Sasuke's sword got stopped by his bare neck, which would be one of the weakest parts of your body. And then you have Naruto's punch, which does good damage to the fully transformed Momoshiki. So his potency should scale actually above that of Sasuke's sword. And also, I showed Sasuke's Susanoo already, and then we have Kaguya punching the crap out of Sasuke's Susanoo. And we have Naruto, who is able to match those same punches with his chakra punches, which also backs up him being far more powerful than Obito's chakra hands. In a collision with Kaguya right here, smashing vacuum fist versus his chakra fists, and they were about even. And let's see, I'm gonna just quickly go through some of my scans to make sure there's nothing else I want to go over when it comes to potency, but that hits a lot of the man strides here. So we have, you could argue, obviously Madara's cutting those mountains in half would at least be multi-mountain level based off just visuals, but considering he hit them miles away, which is why I would argue up to island level.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You have
air pressure dissipates over distance.
Yeah, power dissipates over distance, and yet it's still cutting mountains in half. So I'd argue the sword strike itself, if it directly hit you, that would have island level potency. And then you have like Sasuke, who's far above that, who is destroying giant meteors that are each like island size and just cutting right through them like butter and doing multiple of them at once.
Well, without air pressure this time, but yeah.
Well, he would need, yeah, it's a direct strike, but you would still need air pressure to get across it because they're like miles longer than his sword.
Yeah, the kinetic force did continue.
Going through solid rock, like the whole way through.
Yeah, the kinetic force did continue. I'm just saying, I guess I'm being specific. It's not like he sniped it from afar with just air pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, which would be a lot more impressive, but yeah, it's a direct strike, but he would still need like the force to go all the way through and slice them up. It's
Correct.
not like he's hitting them and they're smashing apart. It's going through like in a straight cut.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, here's one more thing. This time it was a barrier put up by Obito, but it's a similar barrier as before, and this time he had 4 of those tailed beast bombs go off inside of it, and he himself was inside of it and used his TSB shield to block it. So that took 4 tailed beast bombs that each should be around smaller country level in AoE power, and they were focused in that one area, and his TSB blocked it all. And then you have Madara, after absorbing the 10 tails, who's even stronger, got punched right through his shield by 8-Gate Guy's punch. So 8-Gate Guy's punch would have more potency than what the 10 tails beast bombs have showed, even when restricted. And then
actually, real
Madara
quick,
took that punch, and that same Madara was cut in half by Sasuke. A stronger version of Madara was cut in half by Sasuke, because this was actually Madara before absorbing the God Tree. And then you have Momoshiki, who can't even be cut by Sasuke's sword, and Naruto, who could hurt Momoshiki with his punch. So there is like a lot of scaling above country level and striking power when it comes to Naruto. Not to mention how he blocks that moon slicing attack with one hand and goes through it, which also could be argued as country to continental levels of power going through that.
I think Toneri Strike requires scaling from previous feats. What it shows is, I would definitely say, once again, is a massive AoE. You've done really good feats here that are all very, very good, that of course I would say scaled beneath Toneri, but Toneri's feat requires these to get an AP value from, because its length is literally longer than what it's cutting. Again, if I was to show the 10,000 across the big bubble attack, if I was asking for its potency, I'm talking about like all those little 50s inside. Like,
yeah, I agree. Like, his potency would only need to be strong enough to cut Moon Rock, but it shows how much power he has within him, and they can like concentrate their power, as I've shown. So like, DC is like a way, as long as the character can control their power, you can measure their attack potency almost like that. Like in Dragon Ball Z, like you could say, oh, if they blow up a planet, but then half the time their ki blasts are tiny, does that mean they're weaker, or is it potency? So same thing in Naruto. As long as they have the ability to control their power in a single point, you can argue they also have the potency on par with their AoE. But obviously, if it's an ability, like an explosive ability they have no control of, then it's like something that you could argue is like, oh, you can't translate potency to it. But I think Naruto, with if they like they've shown with chakra control and their strikes and whatnot, and what they've done, they definitely have control of potency here.
I would definitely disagree that anything in Naruto is suggested that they can say, oh, I have enough chakra control, that somehow that means the attack that requires this AoE or length of it or whatever to do the destruction it did in the first place, I can equate my AP to that destruction. Again, I think it requires scaling. I think his attack scales above everything you've shown, but requires the scaling to do so, is all I'd say. But yeah, I can go through some contentions, and ultimately, of course, because sadly, Yu Hakusho is not nearly as long as this series, but I'd be bringing it back to Sensui, of course. But okay, so Sensui, Madara Susanoo destroys from miles away and cuts through the top of 2 mountains with the air pressure alone. He heavily fragments the mountains in front of him, or the meteor rock really in front of him as well on top of it, and it requires air pressure to dissipate as it's getting weaker and weaker and still has enough potency cut through the top. Let's just, for argument's sake, take what you would consider the size of Beheaded Hill and say that it's the size of an island. How many human-sized fists would fit inside of Susanoo's sword, Madara's?
I mean, probably a few thousand.
Okay, I would say that the potency is concentrated a few thousand times more when he destroys not just some miles and then takes out the 2 tops of 2 mountains, and it's a meteor rock, which is still a very impressive thing, and I'll keep going as I go through this. It's like destroying not just 2 mountains and meteor area, it's like destroying a whole island, but with a few thousands times more concentrated. Again, my 2 awesome artwork pictures. All of that AP is concentrated into the size of a fist. In this feat, since we're comparing air pressure to air pressure. Additionally,
but Madara's a few thousand times further away, though. So
yes and no. So
like, it's not like Sensui swung his arm and cut Beheaded Hill in half, like from miles away.
Correct.
It would be an insane feat.
Correct. I agree. However, the end of Beheaded Hill, kind of like the meteors that you're talking about Sasuke cutting through, even though he made contact, let's say, like, the end of Beheaded Hill, the size of Beheaded Hill, even just using what you have it at in size, let alone what I have it at, would be further away in distance that the air pressure would have had to have traveled than what Madara's Susanoo did. And what he did was pulverize it. So like vaporization takes a whole different tier of energy than just simple destruction of a thing. Like if we wanted to pulverize, like turn basalt rock into dust, takes far less than to straight vaporize it and turn it into like steam and mist or something. Now, he didn't vaporize Beheaded Hill, but he did pulverize a majority of it and heavily fragment the rest of it. So at this point, we can see that there are clear feats for both sides. If we're talking, of course, AP and DC, which is the section we're in here, Naruto has feats that you can scale from, proper scaling, as he's actually showing and did show, where you can actually see that the potency is properly used and is conveyed, that you can see that large destructive feats and everything can actually be condensed down into really solid AP feats, where the condensed energy is into a small area and still like scales above. So that's why pretty much the major reason why I'm convinced that, Naruto can actually scale into Continental now, because he showed valid evidence. Now, one thing I wanted to bring up, however, is when we talk about, say, Obito destroying what the Ten Tails bombs couldn't, converting that into like a higher AP. I want to make it clear is that that is higher AP, but not to like the same deviation that you would expect from the general condensing of, say, one feat into another by, making it smaller. Because it is certainly true that Obito could destroy that barrier that the Ten Tails couldn't. And it's true that he did it, with less AoE. By all means, he is quite a bit more potent than what the Ten Tails could bring out. The only problem I have with it, in terms of like, if you wanted to say that they're vastly above, or like scaling them such that it's like a very large gap, and not just even an average gap, so to speak, is strictly that the Ten Tails went against the combined like durability of the whole barrier. That is to say that the force of the Ten Tails bombs was expanded across the entirety of the barrier. Whereas Obito, unlike, say, Sensui destroying the entirety of Beheaded Hill, and I don't want to get this wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks heavily like Obito destroys specifically what he grabs, like it gets shredded, and while he is far more potent, I keep saying far more, but like that's the thing, that's the bit of the unknown. He seems to destroy simply what he grabs, and the rest of it goes as part of like the effect being taken down. Like because enough was destroyed, the rest kind of went away on its own. Not necessarily nothing conveys that Obito like destroyed the entirety of the barrier. Rather, he destroyed simply the amount he did, and ergo the rest of it was destroyed. That's why it's not the same. If he had been able to like destroy the entire barrier with the AoE rather than like via effect of destroying the amount he did, which is far less than the totality of the barrier, then I would be saying like he has far more potency. That's the one thing I was trying to bring up with that. And that's just an important fact to address across any feat at any given time. If we're going to say the attack is shrunk, that and they have like an equal effect, then the size difference, of course, is a direct correlation into the difference in AP. However, the amount destroyed also matters. Obito, to be clear, did both. He both destroyed more and with less AoE. But the destroyed more needs to be very clear here. He destroyed more because the Ten Tails didn't destroy any, but that doesn't mean he destroyed all of it. Hopefully this is clear. He didn't destroy like the whole barrier. He destroyed what he did, and ergo, via effect of what was destroyed, the whole barrier went. At least that's heavily what seems to be the case and what was visually shown. So that's my only point on that. Not that it's less potent or anything. Continental Naruto makes perfect sense with all of the feats shown in the scaling. Now, the other thing to address is, so is it fair with what was brought up on Sensui's scale? Well, you heard it, and of course I agree, logistically and just factual based, it is true. Sensui's hand would indeed fit couple thousand times inside Madara Susanoo's sword because of the size difference. That's, as I've just described, if for them to destroy the same amount of matter would mean that Sensui is showing a couple thousand times more potency. Madara, to equal Sensui, would need to destroy a couple thousand times more matter in the same way, air pressure, to match Sensui, who could destroy, if Sensui was to only destroy the same amount as Madara did, but with a couple thousand times less AoE, right? But then, and he was saying that what Madara destroyed, because via air pressure, that would lend itself to island potency. Well, I personally tend to almost get to island level off of that, because Madara destroyed so much less than a actual island, which I'll get to that part next. But first off, let's just say it does get to island level. Well, even if we were to use, so if we were to say that the Okumen trees, which are by every means of feats and consistency and accuracy, bare minimum, like a pretty hefty island-sized amount of mass. Since we busting already an island worth of mass, but also with thousands of times less AoE, means that all of it is multiplicative. Instead of 2 mountains and a couple miles of rock and then heavily fragmenting, the meteor rock in front of him, you're talking about an entire island. You're talking about already several hundreds of times, depending on the island size, however you want to go, maybe even into like 1,000 times the potency that Madara showed just in what Sensui destroyed. I'm sorry, I said an island-sized Okumen tree. If we were to take his scaling and say just island-sized Beheaded Hill, with all of the feats, like, except for, like I said, 1.5 skins versus everything else, consistency and accuracy at this point safely say that it supports country-sized Beheaded Hill. But just with the scaling, if you listening to this are convinced by the lesser of the proofs shown, then what Sensui destroyed being island-sized, let's say, that's where, okay, that's still, like I said, about maybe up to 1,000 times more potent than what Madara destroyed, but times another couple thousand, because the size difference of a fist compared to Madara's Susanoo sword is coming out to, at minimum, coming around to, let's not say the island size compared to what he destroyed is a full 1,000 times difference. Let's just say he destroyed 500 times more, in a total island compared to what Madara destroyed. He's destroying probably about 2,000, like, his potency is about 2,500 times what Madara Susanoo feat on that specific scan showed. And then, Sensui's scaling is such that he's so trash that, Yusuke is vastly superior. I just wanted to make it very clear, the feats are pretty certain here. Even if you were to take Beheaded Hill at an island level, the size of what is destroyed is multiplicative compared to the other feat and what it destroys. But the size difference of what's doing the destroying is also multiplicative. Sensui destroys nearly as much as anything shown in Naruto, but with far, far, far less. That is simply a fact. In terms of feats shown, more, if not about an equal amount of anything in Naruto shown to be destroyed, but destroyed with far, far, far less AoE. Meaning the potency verbatim is shown to be far, far, far higher. Just Sensui. Now, the other thing to bring up, to make this not be too much longer, is that when we talk about, he brought up, like, okay, but Madara did it from afar, and Sensui didn't. And I was like, that's kind of true, but not really. And then, I went into it. This was already addressed by him, however, when I was like, hey, alright, just to make sure we're clear here, Sasuke's Susanoo sword against those meteors was full contact. And he was like, yeah, but, it had to continue. In fact, I actually have the clip here. So he says it perfectly, and it's all true, but you can listen to it right here.
Yeah, power just dissipates over distance, and yet it's still cutting mountains in half. So I would argue the sword strike itself, if it directly hit you, that would have island level potency. And then you have, like, Sasuke, who's far above that, who is destroying giant meteors that are each like island size and just cutting right through them like butter and doing multiple of them at once.
Well, without air pressure this time, but yeah.
Well, he would need, yeah, it's a direct strike, but you would still need air pressure to get across it because they're like miles longer than his sword.
And so yeah, I mean that explains it perfectly. I mean, essentially, what Sensui destroyed, even if you were to just hyper lowball it to island size, the air pressure does dissipate as it travels, and it had to travel a much further distance than anything that any of them ever did show. Because, unlike full contact, Sasuke's Susanoo sword, Madora's, Sensui's fist never made full contact at all. It was pure air pressure from the beginning to end, and was several thousand times less in AoE, aka more potent, bare minimum, let alone that it was pure air pressure from the entire thing. There was no direct contact into it. So, when we are talking about these feats, these are the facts about Sensui's feat. He destroyed, realistically, most let me just say it now. This is the full claim. Sensui most accurately and consistent-wise destroyed a country-sized amount of rock, pulverized a vast majority of it, heavily fragmented the rest, with merely the air pressure and no direct contact, with the size of an attack coming from AoE several thousand times less than, say, a Susanoo sword. That's the feat, and that's why it's so impressive. And additionally, that's also why it's important to note why, while Sensui isn't, like, technically far away from Beheaded Hill when he does the destroying, such as Madara's swing compared to the mountains he cleaved, the air pressure that dissipates as it travels, such as Sasuke's full contact Susanoo sword strike, Sensui's human-sized fist non-contact strike actually still traveled a much further distance, air pressure-wise, than even Madara's Susanoo air pressure did. So it still traveled a much, much further distance. And that's the last thing to note.
Okay, you keep saying he's destroying him with wind pressure, but if I'm not mistaken, didn't he punch Yusuke, who was above him, and then it crumbled underneath him? And when it comes to physics, like, when you hit something, it hits back with the same amount of force. So if his foot's on the ground, and he punches Yusuke with a certain amount of force, that same force, and if Yusuke, like, blocks that same force is getting traveled back and going into his foot and into the ground itself. So, I mean, it's kind of like direct contact. Obviously, it's more impressive than if you punched it directly, but it's still, like, a lot of force is going back into that hill, which is why it shattered.
Oh, man. I see that as a big ol' leap. I think conservation of energy is... Let's just say that is almost always ignored in mangas. If you want to argue that there's a conservation of energy happening, that he's taking what he's dishing out, I mean, I can only really disagree. I don't think that's ever borne out in pretty much any manga. But secondarily, Yusuke didn't block it. He had, since we just straight missed. See if I can pull up the actual destroying it. Oh, sorry, I'm in wrong thing. Video, contents, let's go back. There we go. Let's see. Sui. Let's see. Let's see, did it get posted? So yeah, he was punching Yusuke. I don't have just before this because this is the actual feat, so I did just grab the feat. But they were fighting just before, and he goes for an uppercut after Yusuke had been already like knocked away some, and he just straight misses. He had already been like pseudo blitzing him. This is the air pressure that leads to. Well, I kind of already had it, but I'll put it again. This, of course, which ultimately ends up looking like this. Now, again, if we're saying that it's like the size of an island, he's covering a further distance with the air pressure, meaning it took longer and longer for it to get, like it got weaker and weaker for an even further distance, while being several thousand times more concentrated into the size of a fist in comparison to, say, Madara Susanoo, and was in pulverization and not destruction, albeit the fact that Madara Susanoo potency was enough that it kept going, right? It did cut through. So, I mean, I would even just grant that the pulverization versus being able to keep going and cut through could even be equalized, just for argument's sake. However,
I'm seeing something weird in this scan. I don't know if they're way closer than I think they are, but it looks like they're on the rocks. And the last one you posted, they're on the rocks after they destroyed the Beheaded Hell, and they're still down there, and they're looking down at them, the others. And you could see Yusuke and Sensui's body, like, from this distance. Which, if they're anywhere close to that thing, it would imply it's much smaller than we're saying. But I don't know, you can say that's an artist mistake, or if I'm just confused about how far they're supposed to be here.
No. So, they are on what's left of them. I think if I was to have a person on the top of my house and compare the size of them to my house, that'd be one thing. But you don't run a tornado through my house and have the roof collapsed in and then have a guy standing on what's left of my house and say, oh man, he looks pretty big compared to what's left of the house. Like,
yeah, I mean, obviously to a certain extent, but I'm saying it's like, if we're talking island to country sized here, that's like kind of insignificant. But yeah, I'm just saying it could just be the author wanted to draw where they were, but that would definitely contradict, even if it's collapsed, it being like country sized, obviously.
Pulverization, of course, is dust. Like, literally, it's not even. I don't think that it actually harms the feat at all in terms of it being country size based on but the logic behind it, the reason I feel that way is because scaling something based on something that's already been destroyed makes absolutely no sense, especially if we're talking about something being literally like the majority of it being turned into powder. Like, you would want all that dust reconformed back, building on top of itself, more and more, until you get the full structure again, to actually get the idea of its size. You also, from the, you can't see, like, it compared to any Okuman trees. Look, I'll say this, full stop. If in this picture here, we could see one of the Okuman trees, unlike every other shot that we ever see of it, if there was an Okuman tree here, and it was, like, the size of them right here, I would agree with you. But without that, like all the other shots, I think it's just simply a wholly different angle on top of something that's been completely pulverized into dust. I don't think it counts against it at all, is my take. But your other feat going about, like the Biju bombs, because the Tintail flicks away that Biju bomb, which of course is extremely impressive. You have Biju bomb taking out the Goju Rashomon.
Yeah, something like that.
Which is changing its trajectory. Alright, and so I'm going to wrap this up so I can move on to part 3 later, but this is already a long enough video for sure. But the last part is conservation of energy, equal and, I forget the saying. Equal actions, equal and opposite reactions or something, I don't know. Talking about, like, Kun Sensui's foot have destroyed Beheaded Hill. Not that that wouldn't be like an insane, impressive feat as well, even though it would be going in a different direction for it to have destroyed the way it did. Yeah, if we're talking about physics, is it possible? Sure, but mangas pretty much never do it that way. Almost never, ever. Now, I would only need to show that Yu Hakusho doesn't do it, but this isn't supposed to be just about Yu Hakusho. But for any manga or anime or what have you, Um, Essentially, if you think that the physics follow that, and should be assumed, then I would want to see why almost no feat ever works that way in most of any fiction ever. For example, like hopefully I don't feel like doing the rest of the scans. It's been a long day today. Um, for those who know, Yusuke, when he when he was cuffed and fired against his spirit gun, knocked Toguro through the stadium, through the forest, yada yada. Now that's a lot of force. Yusuke fired that mid-air, and yet wasn't sent nearly anywheres. Definitely not comparative to like Toguro. And Toguro was beefier than that Yusuke. He wasn't even harmed. If anybody should have not been moved, it would have been Toguro. Yet he was sent so far. Yusuke wasn't even moving at all. Toguro, whenever he air pressure swung through things with his arms, it wasn't till his arms, like in the air pressure, made contact with anything that anything was destroyed. It wasn't his feet doing the destroying. Just two easy examples off the top of my head. But no, this isn't a Yu Hakusho thing. Conservation of energy is simply a real physics thing that simply isn't applied to pretty much any fiction ever. Now, again, if we're talking strictly debate, all I'd have to show is that Yu Hakusho doesn't do it. It doesn't. It doesn't care about that, actual physics part. And so it plays no role here. No, Sensui's attack was very objectively destroyed by the air pressure of his punch. That's what caused the destruction. That's what he did to cause the destruction. Going to physics there when it's something that's never shown to be something that even plays a role in pretty much any fiction, let alone Yu Hakusho, which verbatim shows it doesn't. No. So that's all I'll say about that. Now, I will apply that to any other series, of course, unless shown otherwise. It's seriously, it's a thing that's just not really taken into account. I'm sure because it would be annoying as hell to actually sit there and try to accurately convey every time a feat is supposed to go off as a mangaka. So I don't blame them, but let's be real here. It's not utilized. Now that said, that pretty much wraps up this video. And we're into the first half of AP versus DC. Hopefully you see that just strictly speaking, AP, it's not just the size of the matter destroyed, but how it's destroyed. In this case, Madara's sword was able to cleave through with the air pressure, keep going, which is very impressive. Sensui was able to pulverize, not just heavily fragment, and he pulverized the vast majority of it, which is very impressive. That all factors in. But then, of course, while this applies to Sensui here, it's for any series. The smaller the AoE of the attack doing the destruction, the more impressive, multiplicatively so. And in this case, Sensui's feat is now full stated once more, as accurately and consistently as possible, is shown to have destroyed a country-sized amount of rock via heavy fragmentation at a minor end and complete pulverization on a heavy end with the AoE of a human-sized fist. This is why I said his full contact punch would be around multi-continental. This is why I always claim this. And that his special moves, just at a minimum scaling of when Yusuke very first got his spirit gun, which is a 2x increase, let alone what it actually would be if we weren't trying to lowball so hard. This is why I was saying that you could easily get him towards like even closing in on small planetary, though he would be more like hit a small planet so hard that it's going to fall apart, or like it's not going to bust it. He's not a buster. But anyways, that's why I have him about where I do, and all the feats and facts are kind of going in that direction. And I really hope it's not coming off as biased. That is not the goal. I just want to show that, as I did in the first video, there's far more consistency in scans pointing towards the size being what I said, and just objectively so, the AP works exactly as I've been saying since day one on any given site, any sort of comments, or Comic Vine entirely, and Sensui feat leads credence to this. So this is simply verbatim the facts of how it goes. But part 2 of AP versus DC, part 3 of the total debate will be coming up in a few days. So I hope you guys enjoy, and peace.